So I'm super excited to be here. Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about Sunshield and Floodpath
Yeah,
to kind of kick us off?
yeah, totally. So Sunshield was the first book in this duology that released last year at the start of like the world falling apart. And so it's kind of weird that now here we are almost a year later. Um, and Sunshield is essentially about a desperate outlaw and a sheltered diplomat and a political prisoner who find their paths crossing on a quest to expose a system of corruption. And their stories start out very separate throughout Sunshield, and then they kind of start to come together towards the end of the book. And so Floodpath is book 2 of this duology, and it's where we see them. They're all sort of all together, and then they're sort of not, and they're kind of out in the wilderness, but they're having to continue to struggle to solve this mystery of who's behind basically a political coup to overthrow this country and keep this very repressive system, hierarchical system in place. And so that's kind of what they're trying to accomplish. And there's a lot of trekking across the wilderness, a lot of survival situations. I really love like taking everything away from my characters and just shoving them out into the wilderness. And I do that probably the most in Floodpath than I've done in any other book. So that was a lot of fun. So that's kind of this series in a nutshell. How about you, Intisar? Tell us about the Theft of Sunlight.
Okay, so Theft is a companion novel to my book Thorn that was originally indie published in 2012 and then was fortuitously re-released from Harper Teen last March, the day after Ohio went into lockdown.
Yeah.
It'll slightly rocky start.
Yeah.
Thorn is a retelling of The Goose Girl, and it has some interesting elements in it. And one of the threads that's kind of left unresolved is the fact that these children are disappearing from around the city and the kingdom, and no one knows what happens to them. And so Theft of Sunlight kind of picks up that thread with a whole new main character. So Ray is a country girl. She grows up on a horse farm. Her cousin has married up into nobility. And at the beginning of the book, Ray's best friend's sister is snatched, is stolen. And there's no way to trace her, right? Even this is world magic, even the mages cannot trace children who are snatched. And so she realizes that, like, really, that's ridiculous. Someone's got to know something. Something needs to be done, and how come no one is figuring this out? And so she accepts an invitation from her cousin who lives at court to go there, meaning to kind of ask around and push people who can do things to do things. And so she ends up meeting our characters from Thorn, and specifically Princess Alira. And she becomes an attendant to this new foreign princess who's marrying into the royal family. And because Alira was the Goose Girl, she actually knows that this is not some kind of made up fantasy of the poor folk, and children really are disappearing. And so Ray, instead of pushing people to do things, ends up being the person who has to do the things. And between the court and connecting with thieves in the city, she begins to, and a tax clerk, she begins to unravel exactly
the tax clerk.
So
I love.
One of the things I know I just mentioned the tax clerk, and you were like, yes. And so one of the things I love about your books that I think also happens in my book is that figuring out what's wrong is like not necessarily glorious and glamorous. There's
right.
some hard, trudging kind of work that has to be done. So I want you to talk a little bit about that aspect in your book.
Yeah, I love that. I love that about your books, but some of my favorite books have that, they're an epic fantasy. They have an incredible magic system or a system of deities, a pantheon of gods or something, but there's also that mundane drudgery of everyday life. Like they still have to do taxes, right? Or some, whatever it is, they have to keep, maintain their, the inner workings of their magic society. And I love that. I love that element of comparing, putting the two extremes together, this high fantasy aspect, but then also just the humdrum drudgery of everyday life. And yeah, that's something that I really enjoyed. That's why I was like, the tax clerk. It was just so, I was telling my mom that I was reading this book. She's like, oh, what are you reading right now? And I was like, oh, I'm reading The Theft of Sunlight by Intisar Khanani, and I'm really loving it. And she's like, oh, what do you like about it? And I was like trying to articulate that aspect of it. And all I could get out was like, there's this tax clerk and they're like going through old tax files to solve the mystery. And my mom's like, she okay? She's like, long ago, she figured out that we have different tastes in books. So she's just like, okay. But no, that's kind of what I was going for, that excitement of, it makes the world feel lived in, right? It makes it feel like there's history and baggage and just a day-to-day class of people that's not the sword-wielding, swashbuckling hero or heroine. Yeah. So I really liked that. You asked me to talk about my book. I'm just like fangirling about your book. Yeah, I guess it occurs in my books as well, I suppose. The day-to-day aspect. You know, Lark is there are three sort of narrators.
Yeah, Lark's my favorite. Just
Lark is kind of the anchor of the series. She's the Sunshield Bandit. She's a Western outlaw, and it's her title of the Sunshield Bandit that gives book one, Sunshield, its name. And so she definitely has this persona that she projects, but has also just sort of been foisted upon her by like sheriffs and posses and like wanted posters. It's the Sunshield Bandit. And so she kind of has to like put on this disguise when she's out robbing stagecoaches and she's sort of like a desert Robin Hood, sort of robbing the rich to give to the poor kind of thing.
I was gonna say we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that she's actually one of those, you know, like the bandit with the heart of gold.
Yes, and I love that we have so many similar characters, I feel like, in these books. Which is really funny. We built very similar, we can get to this later, but we built very similar like hierarchical societies. And then we also have some very similar characters.
And we're dealing with one of like the main issue, I think, between our two books, not to completely go off from the original question, but we're both dealing with the issue of human trafficking, which,
right.
I mean, I think it's so awesome that our books are coming out on the same day, that we're both dealing with the same issue in a very real and deep way, in a very different way for both of them. So.
Yeah. And I know that both of us have been, we drew that inspiration from things that we're seeing happening right now. You know, this is a very kind of modern take on human trafficking. And it's very much like a silent evil in this country. And where I live along kind of the I-85 corridor between Charlotte and Atlanta, it's one of the most heavily trafficked areas in the United States. And you'll see billboards and signs and like classes that teach truckers how to recognize when this is taking place. And that really kind of wriggled its way into this story. And I imagine it was sort of similar for you. Can you talk some on that as well?
So it was a little bit different in that I initially, when I had written Thorn, I knew these children were disappearing, but I thought it was a relatively minor plot point that would kind of get figured out relatively easily. And then I came across, it was literally like a change envelope on an airline collecting money for a nonprofit that addressed human trafficking. And I was like, oh, hold on, like, wait a minute. This is what I'm not talking about. Again, we're not talking about like old day slavery. I'm talking about modern day slavery. This
right
is really
now.
happening. I live in Cincinnati, which was the end of, or not the end of, but a critical point on the Underground Railroad from the South, where once you pass the Ohio River, you're technically in a free state. Now, most enslaved peoples had to continue to run to Canada to be guaranteed their freedom because they were bounty hunters and so forth who could easily operate in these states. But so right downtown is the Underground Railroad Freedom Center. It's a place I visited, and I visited specifically when I was researching modern human trafficking for this book, because you realize just how, as you said, we don't have billboards here, but the fact that it's happening, that it's possibly happening, you know, right down the street from me. And I was unaware of how to even
Mm-hmm.
recognize what you might be saying. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the examples in the Freedom Center were just stunning because you could like they were all real world examples,
Mm-hmm.
and they were, you know, women who
Mm-hmm.
were literally held as enslaved peoples and forced to work in a country club in Florida,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
did no one
Yeah.
notice? Did no one talk to them? No, they
Yeah.
don't speak English, so they're
Yeah.
just like the work, the help, and
Yeah.
nobody noticed, you know. And it's
Yeah.
just it's stunning. So
Yeah.
thinking about that, wrapping my mind around that, and then you know, I give it a little bit more of a fantasy twist where we have,
Mm-hmm.
you know, this they're magically warded from people who are searching for them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they escape, there's this other aspect where if you don't quickly give them the blessing,
Yeah.
um, this kind of dark thing that is purportedly in their blood basically eats their minds, and
Yeah.
they lose themselves. So
That
you
was
don't even ask them any
terrifying. Thanks for
questions,
that.
right? You just, you're like, we're not gonna ask a question, we're gonna give them
Yeah.
the blessing, and then they don't remember what happened to them, right?
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
this whole for theft, there's a whole hierarchy built in where you're like, well, where is this all coming from, and what is
Yeah.
happening, and where does the corruption lead? And the same with Floodpath
Mm-hmm.
is this question of like, okay, so we have people with motivations, but like, who is the person who's
Yeah.
pulling the strings, right?
Yeah.
That's the real mystery. And I sorry, and I've been talking for a while.
No,
The
keep
only
going.
thing that I see is like really different between um our portrayals of human trafficking and the
Mm-hmm.
real world is that in the real world there's no one person who's pulling the strings.
Right.
I
Yeah.
wish there were, because we could take them down. But
Yeah. Yeah.
there's no one person.
Yeah.
It's this kind of widespread network.
Yeah. And I think in both of our stories, yeah, because it is they are two fictional stories, there is ultimately kind of one entity or group of people who are sort of pulling the strings. But I also think we both built societies that are very similar in how it's so baked into the structure of the society. And like like you said, people, it's like, did nobody notice? Does nobody notice? And in your book, it's literally like the nobility's like, oh, well, the commoners just make this stuff up to like, you know, whatever.
Make their kids
Feel,
behave, right?
yeah, yeah. It's like the boogeyman, right? So yeah, so and that really for me when I was writing Sunshield, and then it was starting to kind of pick up speed as quarantine was happening and the lockdown was happening, it felt like that period of time just shined this spotlight on the inequalities in our system. And they've always been there, but it was like, oh, you know, some people literally cannot afford to be off work, or some people, you know, are forced to go to work even if they are high risk, you know. So it's like it was shining this huge light on the cracks in our society, and that really started to feel very I don't know, very like it was happening right there, you know, what the same kinds of things that we both had written about in our books. So I thought that was really interesting when I finished The Theft of Sunlight, how similar those two societies were, that we built great minds.
Yeah.
Also probably terrifying, being in a terrifying modern society.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that got really dark really fast. We also have some very similar characters though too, right? We have similar worlds, but we already touched a little bit on the bandits with the heart of gold.
Yeah.
But we also have other characters. What are some characters that you think are
Well,
have some similarities?
I think Ray and Varen are very interesting and similar in certain ways. So Ray is my main character, my country girl. Varen is your rather sheltered diplomat,
Yes.
and he may be a prince,
Yeah.
but he does not know how the world works.
Yep.
He's darling, like I adore the boy. I love that, you know, he has this this kind of stars in the eyes idea of what it is to be a hero, and like how he just wants to like go out and save people. It's a very real and rude awakening about, you know, what heroism is and what it looks
Yes.
like. And I think one of the things I love about both our characters is they fail a lot, like, like a lot,
Lots of failing.
and they make lots of mistakes.
Yeah.
And I feel that's a very real, and I think it's a really important aspect of young adult literature that we sometimes lose
Mhm.
track of, which is that like this is when you are coming into your own is when you are making all the mistakes and
Yeah.
you don't necessarily know how the rules work and you don't know how to survive in a water scrape, even though you've read all the
Mhm.
textbooks. And you know, you may think that, you know, with Ray, like she has this innate belief that like there's a little bit of goodness in everyone and there's good
Mhm.
people everywhere, and that's not necessarily completely accurate. There are good people everywhere, but not
Mhm.
everyone is is gonna be kind to you just because
Yeah.
you know you had a good conversation with them, right? They
Yeah.
um so
Gosh,
I
her,
really
yeah,
just see
her
it from
like
perspective.
her emotional journey throughout the book, you know, where she is at the beginning and where just even the last few pages, like I think I sent you a message as soon as I finished the book and I was just like, how dare you?
You did.
And I was like, why would you do this to Ray? Like,
Look, I
but
just
it was great.
I need to point out that authors do not have as much power over our stories as some people
Oh yeah.
sometimes think
No,
they
absolutely
do.
not.
And
Yeah.
I don't want to hurt Ray, but there's no story otherwise. Like her
Right.
story is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that was amazing. Just seeing her, yeah, she starts out with this like buoyant hope of like, sure, like you said, surely somebody must know something and want to do something about it, like me. And by the end of the book, she's like, this world is terrible and I'm gonna burn it to the ground. Like she's just like, and but in like a good way, right?
I'm gonna burn the bad guys to the ground.
Like a heroic way, I suppose. So yeah, so and I think that my characters also go through those similar arcs of like, hey, things are mostly okay, and then wow, things are not okay at all in any aspect, and we need to start over.
But I think
So
that's part of like when you are delving into a big and deep issue like human trafficking, but there's other ones
mhm,
out there, you know, rape culture, all these other things
mhm,
where when you first begin to learn about it, you're like, oh, like this is bad, you know,
mhm,
but like we're gonna do things about it. And then you're
mhm.
like, oh, like awake now. This
Yeah,
is like
yeah,
it's overwhelming and it's terrible.
right.
And you know, it's very easy, and I think many of us do shut down because
Hmm.
how do you deal with it? And so
Sure. Hmm.
you know, and I see that like for a little just for a moment with your characters when there's a certain point when they're like
Hmm.
this is everywhere and this is
Yeah.
you know is it actually like all the people in power,
Hmm.
is it this group, like who's behind it, can we
Hmm.
actually take this on, or are we
Yeah.
just gonna die trying
Yeah.
and it's gonna die and it's gonna
Yeah.
be
That's it. Yeah.
so it's these
The
real
end.
moments,
Chapter 4.
you know,
Yeah.
dark moments of
Yeah.
understanding your reality.
Yeah.
Creatures for hurting our characters.
Yeah. But they ultimately rise back up stronger, right? That
Yeah.
was one of the things in Floodpath that I kept, it was kind of the main theme for many of my characters was this sense of identity. And at the beginning of Sunshield, they all three of them, so we've talked about Lark and Viren, and then there's also Tamsin, who's the political prisoner of that trio that I mentioned at the beginning. And
Can
all
I
three of them
say,
had pretty, what? No, go
can
ahead.
I just say that like poor Tamsin
Poor Tamsin.
from day one in this book, I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, she
Uh,
starts as a political prisoner. At least everyone
yeah.
else was in like an
Kind of okay. Yeah, no, she's kind of pretty, but
what happened to this girl? Because she doesn't just
she,
start as a political prisoner. She also starts having been physically hurt in a really
yeah,
terrible.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I actually was very intimidated to write Tamsin because I wasn't sure. Well, first of all, just from like a logistical writing standpoint, for most of Sunshield, she's in the same four walls. She's a prisoner. She's in a cell, and there's only so interesting you can make someone in the same four walls, for the span of the book. And so I was like, oh, how am I going to pull this off? But then, yeah, also like she's been traumatized. She's been through trauma, and she's lost everything that she thought she had. Spoilers, I suppose.
Spoiler, it works. I mean, it is
like you said, it's from page 1. This is the beginning. But she surprised me because right from the gate, she had this dry sense of humor and this like kind of wry way of observing the world and processing everything that I did not expect. So to your point earlier that these characters, there's only so much control we have over these characters. I thought Lark was going to be the sarcastic one. I thought she was going to be like the one, kind of wisecracking and lightening the situation. And that's not how she turned out at all. She's a very stoic character. And Tamsin, it turned out, was the one who she was always kind of looking for this like dark sense of humor. She like you said, she was pretty much as bad as you could get from page 1. And even then she was finding this grim
humor.
Yeah, gallows humor to get her through. And she really grew on me, and I really enjoyed writing her, and carrying her character further in Floodpath was really cool to see her go from all of the characters, like Lark and Viren, they start out Sunshield with this sense of this is what I am, this is who I am. And by the end of Sunshield, and sort of the beginning of Floodpath, I'm like, I want to take that all away from them. I want to strip them away, like literally stripping Lark's like vestiges of her old life away from her. And the same variance happens a little bit later, as like you said, he has this sort of crisis of like everything he thought he is actually not. And so, and Tamsin has a similar kind of arc where it's like she had, been in this position of power.
Stripped away.
Yeah. And then, but that's great, right? You take them down to like bare bones, and it's like, well, what are you gonna do now? And ultimately, they showed me where they could go from there, and they rose stronger than ever, I hope.
I think that's one of the things I love about young adult books generally, the genre as a whole, is that there's a lot of hope in it, right? Like, we absolutely break down our characters, but we know they're going to come back stronger, right?
Yeah.
Even no spoilers. So just generally speaking, like if there's a character death, you still, you learn and you move forward, the people who survive, right? Whereas, when I look at adult literature, and most of the time I'm like, oh man, like this is so depressing.
Now I'm sad.
But I think that's part of why YA is so awesome, is because there is hope for the future. These are our young people, and they are going to come out fighting. And they do get broken, and they get hurt, and it hurts. But there's always hope at the end of these stories, and I love that's just my ode to YA. I don't know how you feel about YA. I mean, I know you write it.
Yes. Yeah. No. And I always my books are actually technically classified adult fantasy, but I always have gone into them with a YA kind of attitude of I wanted to write characters that were a little bit older than the traditional like no, but they have like a foot in both. My editor calls it crossover fiction because it's like they're kind of shelved adult, but I was just in a bookstore the other day and it was right there with YA. So they're like both.
It's like what new adult should have been.
Should be, right. Yeah. Characters that are a little bit older, but still, having that sense of like, confronting their identities, but also dealing with a world that's maybe different than what they thought it would be as they grew up. Yeah. So, how about romance? How do you approach romance in your books? Romance. What?
That's an excellent question. I think for me, I definitely go for a slow burn if I'm doing romance,
Hmm.
because I believe that relationships usually need time to
Yeah.
develop and mature, and they need to be developed on a basis of respect. I think that's
Hmm.
really important.
Hmm.
So you'll see that reflected in my books, but it's a lot of fun. Like in um, theft, I can't. Oh, spoilers.
Spoilers.
Oh. How about you? How do you?
No, I'm the same way. That was probably a bad question for both of us because yeah, there's really not much we can give away. No, yeah, I'm the same way. And I really liked with this duology, kind of exploring the different relationships. Um, I don't know, like no, I know I'm like spoilers. I can't say certain things.
Well, I'm going to say that I happen to love the enemies to lovers trope, and I was a
Yeah.
very happy camper reading books. So anyone else out there
Yeah.
is listening. This is take note.
And enemies to lovers is a very it's so great. It's just such a great journey.
I think
um
again, it's to do it
yeah.
well. Like there has to be very good reasons why
Yeah.
your two characters
Yeah.
are enemies, and there has to be deep respect for them to kind of change their stance on how they feel
Right.
about the other person and what exactly is happening in their worlds.
Right. Right. I also, again, not naming character names, but I also delve into sort of the not really the opposite effect, but lovers to allies.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to fall out of love and to have um, two people who thought they had a connection in a certain way, and can you salvage anything from that? And so I had a good time exploring that as well.
And
So
I think so do my best not to spoil. But one of the things I loved about that storyline in Floodpath is it kind of said, once you've gotten over this rush of like
mm-hmm,
the first love kind of thing,
mm-hmm,
and the honeymoon's over, so to speak.
yeah.
A whole bunch of like traumatic bad stuff has happened because you're in
Yeah.
Emily's book. Like, how do relationships mature? Also,
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm-hmm,
and that's something that we don't see a lot of in books that are even crossover YA, right? Where
mm-hmm,
you're not necessarily falling out of love, but you're
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and you are allies.
mm-hmm.
There's so much history between you now, and
Yeah.
so many decisions that were made. And I think I like somewhat differently have that in Thorn. But what does it look like to continue a relationship like that?
Mm-hmm.
In Thorn, my two characters, they go through a lot, and
Yeah.
when they get to the end, they're like, yeah, we're gonna figure this out.
Yeah.
It's gonna take time. Like, is there hope? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, is it here right now? No.
Not at all.
No,
Yeah.
no, we're just gonna keep working at this.
That was so cool about how you built back those two particular characters into the Theft of Sunlight, and how we did get to see from an outsider's perspective, right? Because your main character is outside that main action. That was really cool to see this window into this maturing relationship that was taking place kind of, it was sort of a tertiary line to the other plot points that were going on, but it was still there and it was still important and it was still influencing what was happening in the main story. And,
Yeah.
the sense of trust and like, wow, we've seen some, like, this has been a hot mess. Like, yikes. Not your typical, like, yeah, how did you guys meet? So yeah, that was neat to see that continued. I think that's a really special aspect of those two books, that they're different characters, different countries, different standings in society, but they still somehow like enter the same orbit. That was pretty neat.
Well, speaking of being able to see characters again. So one of the things I love about Sunshield and Floodpath is that we're in the same world as Creatures of Light. And those characters are now like the parents.
Yeah. That was great.
That's just fabulous. So
yeah,
I have to ask you, we talk about world building,
mm-hmm.
and Creatures of Light was this world that it felt very big. I knew there was more beyond it. And then we walk into the Outlaw Road duology.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wow, look at this world here that I didn't know about.
More.
Like, and
I didn't either.
So that's part of the joy of writing.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, how do you, I love your worlds because they seem so big.
Mm-hmm.
I meet your characters and they're walking down the street, and I know there's a whole world beyond that street, and it's there, it's alive. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all.
Yeah.
It's just a comment.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of that comes from sometimes I get too in. This is the park ranger in me, right? So I'm like, okay, well, if there's like a mountain range here, it's affecting the topography on this side of the mountain range, and it's affecting the topography. So part of it is like, so many of these the world that I've built is drawn from American landscapes and places that I've worked and places that I've done research, and all of those things. I'm going to get, this is like putting on my ranger hat now, but like they don't exist in their own little pocket, right? They're all connected. Yeah, and something that you do here is going to affect something that happens there. And so that it just naturally, I don't know, it's how I kind of naturally start to envision the world. And when I wrote Creatures of Light, that land sort of to the west of Alcoro was just like a big kind of blank spot on the map. It was like, I know there's a desert there, and then eventually I guess the land ends somewhere. But I didn't really know much past that. And then as I started kind of exploring that region more, as I was, kind of conceptualizing this duology, it really started falling into place just based on kind of the natural rhythms of our own landscape and the way our own, kind of world works. And so but I also like, because I do my own maps too, and so map making actually really impacts. I'm like, okay, I need them to get from point A to point B, but I need something really terrible to happen, so I'm like, I know it'll be a ravine, or like
I loved the water scrape.
Yes, that's a real thing. It's a real phenomenon. Yes, the water scrape. So the water scrape in my books, and also in our world as well, it's this expanse. I get so excited. This expanse of like waterless plain, waterless desert. And you'd think, well, you're in the desert, of course there's no water, but deserts are formed and carved and pocketed by water. And we see this in Sunshield, where Lark is an expert at finding water in the desert because she's a permanent resident there. That's how she survives. But yeah, you've got to be able to find water. And so the water scrape in our world is this section on the Santa Fe Trail, it's a wagon trail, which is kind of in the south west corner of Kansas, a little bit of Oklahoma, kind of into New Mexico. And it was this expanse that was this big stretch of plain without water. And it was a really big obstacle to wagon trains because there was nowhere to water their animals. There was nowhere to get water for themselves. And if you broke a wagon wheel, or your ox went lame, there's a very real likelihood you're going to just die in this waterless expanse. And so this was where, in this point in the story of Floodpath, I just like stripped all of the gear away from my characters and pushed them out into the water scrape. And it's like, you need to walk to the other side. And when I did that, I didn't know. I was like, actually, I don't know how they're going to get to the other side. I don't know if they'll make it. They might fall in love. They might kill one another. I'm not actually 100% sure. And ultimately, they showed me how they were going to get across. So that was a lot of fun. I just really love diving into these natural landscapes and thinking about the effects and the terrible things they could do to my characters.
Yeah. So it sounds like you approach writing in a somewhat similar way to me, which is a very exploratory process where
Mhm.
I usually have like a grand kind of
Mhm.
overview of what my story is. I know where it begins. I have a pretty good idea of where it ends, and there's a couple points along the middle.
Yep.
And then I have to like get in there and feel it
Yeah.
out, kind of see what the heck my characters do, and half the time I don't know what's gonna happen. Um, and it sounds like similar for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to have a sense of where I'm going. And I do like to plot things out, but no, there's certainly points where I'm like, well, that went differently than I expected. And you realize that whatever it was you had plotted is not the way that the story needs to go, and you just kind of pivot. So yeah, that's a really fun part about writing, I think.
That's very cool. Yeah, I
What's
know there are writers out there who can like detail outline their whole story, and then they write it,
Mhm.
it writes itself that way.
Yeah.
And I have no concept of that.
I
Like,
like outlining. I like doing beat sheets and figuring out where the emotional beats of my story are. But like I said, sometimes I get to that point and I'm like, yeah, no, that's garbage. And
when I was writing, so I also indie publish a series called the Sunbelt Chronicles, and I was writing a second book called Memory Spash, and I was like, I don't have time to do this wrong, so I'm gonna outline this bugger.
Mhm.
And I spent quite a significant amount of time like journaling about the story, and I outlined it. And I really thought through like character motivations at each step, and I had a really clear picture of the story. I wrote about a third of it, and it turned into left field.
Yeah.
And I was like, but
That
no,
was time
no,
wasted.
no. Like, your outline sucks. This is much better. And I was like, oh,
Oh.
okay. That is accurate.
All that time. Yeah. Yeah.
So I love the concept, but it actually is just wasted time for me at a certain point.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, I've got to know where I'm going. And I've got to be ready for the things that I don't see coming, because they're gonna come.
Yeah.
Like you, it's like, are they gonna both
Pew,
make
pew.
it across the water scrape? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. We could just end up with two protagonists. Yeah. So what I'm keeping an eye on the clock, so we have time for audience questions here. What are some of your favorite tropes that you've come up that you've used in your book?
So I definitely have kind of a reluctant heroine. Ray
Mhm.
she's not going to be the hero of the day. She's going to get some other people who should be doing their jobs to do their job.
Yeah.
And I think I kind of love that, because for a lot of us, you're not the chosen one.
Mhm.
God chooses you.
Yeah.
And
I love that.
Start it, you can't always walk away. You don't realize that it's your life work that's like, excuse me, you need to take care of this now.
Yeah.
So on the flip side, like, one of my pet peeves really is the chosen one trope. Like,
Yeah.
like, why you? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No one's that special.
Yeah.
Which I'm sorry. No,
Yes.
say this.
There's Katie.
Readers. But yeah, I love. So I've got the reluctant heroine. We've got the Robin Hood style characters. What about you? What do you have?
Yeah, I love hero's journey. Like, I love quests and questing, and like, we've got to go do the thing, and it's basically just a glorified road trip. I love those kinds of stories. I love survival situations. And yeah, like you, one of my pet peeves with romance and relationships is when someone saves the other, and then it seems like that person is then destined to be with whoever saved them. And that was something.
That one.
Yeah, I really wanted to turn that on its head in multiple ways. Throughout Sunshield, but really more we see it kind of come to fruition in Floodpath. So that was a pet peeve of mine that I really liked.
Well done. Well done with that.
Thank you. Katie's back on screen. Talk to us, Katie.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So I am going to start doing the audience questions. So bear with me. I don't read out loud so well. But I wanted to interject real quickly and just remind myself again why I love YA as a genre, YA authors as people, and just the YA audience in general. Mostly because you can bounce between current events, talking about fandom, and wrapping them all together to make everything relevant in a way that connects with me that no other genre does. So thank you both for doing that. I really appreciate it. It was a really genuinely fascinating discussion, and I love you guys. You guys are great.
Success.
Thank you.
So yes. So we'll start with the first question from Heather. They would like to know what books, series, or authors fuel you both as a writer. So take it. Take on.
Why don't you go first?
Well, anybody who knows me knows that I have to say the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner. This is a series that I've been reading since I was a little kid, and it has had such a huge influence on my writing style, my writing voice, what I consider to be a good story. Oh, Intisar, I was getting like vibes of Return of the Thief and the King of Atolia with The Theft of Sunlight, because Rey is that like outside character looking in at all the like political happenings around her, and sometimes she's just like, why is everyone so messed up? Like, can't someone just make sense here? And that was giving me real like Queen's Thief vibes. So
well,
yes. How about you?
So trying to think. So I would say as a young duckling, I imprinted on Robin McKinley's early works and Tamora Pierce's first books.
Yes.
Those ones were really important in my development as a writer. I met non-white characters in a fantasy land for the first time. I met really strong, unapologetic female heroines. And, you know, both you and I, Emily, we write really strong girls. And I think it was something I was searching for. And when I found it, it just happened to be in YA fantasy, but it like sealed my fate.
Yeah.
This is I will be here the rest of my life.
Yeah. Tamora Pierce had a huge influence. Actually, my top the top row of my bookshelf, those are all my Tamora Pierce books up there.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dane was my favorite.
Yeah. So and I have not read all of their books, but everything I've read I've really enjoyed and loved. I think Deerskin by McKinley I found in high school, and content note for anyone who does look it up, it deals with race, and it is it's a heart-wrenching book. I don't think it's for everyone, but it took me the next step, and like, you know, you really can deal with very deep, very difficult issues in YA, and honestly, this is where you should be doing it, right? Because this is where young people are facing these things, and they're dealing with these issues, and they're asking the hard questions. They're questioning authority. They're wondering whether their governments are corrupt or not. You know, and they are coming from places that are not necessarily empowered, and they have to build their own power. And so, you know, those books kind of helped me see that in myself.
Good answer.
No, 2 thumbs up for that. Mostly because, I do agree with the sense that in YA, you are learning to become yourself. And I've always found the best books, or the best guides, are books. So in that sense, Crawford Q, wait, no, that was the question part. Sorry, that was me. Wanted to know, what characters do you identify with most? And I'm assuming that they meant in your own books, but I'm going to broaden that to literature in general, just because I'm kind of curious.
That's a hard question.
That is a hard question. I once heard Victoria Schwab say that all of her characters were little bits of herself grown into entirely new people. And I was like, yes, like that was exactly how I picture creating characters. Like each of them has a little facet of me somewhere in there, but then they're fleshed out into something entirely different. So which one do I
that does beg the question how you create characters.
Yeah.
Again, I think for me, like it's going back to the exploratory process, it's very discovery oriented. I'll be like, there's this person talking in the back of my head and I need to write a few scenes with them because I don't know who they are.
I need them to get out.
Meet my characters that way. Like I don't know who they are, therefore I have to write their story, and that's how I discover who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So then we go back to like, well, how do you identify, which character do you identify with? And I'm like, well, I don't know where they came from, but they all somehow started inside my head. And I write first person point of view, and so I live their stories with them, and so all of those characters are deeply a part of me, even if I'm not sure how much I'm a part of them.
Yeah.
Like I'm definitely not a street thief.
Yeah.
What?
But yeah, no, I guess, I mean, if I had to pick like, no, I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm very similar to the protagonist of my very first book, Woodwalker, May, because she's a very rangery type character, and but she's still, we're not exactly the same. She has some differences to me. So yeah, it's not as easy of a question as you'd think it would be.
But I think in terms of like identifying with them, in terms of like, not necessarily do I see myself in them, but are they just like super special to me and like I love them? Like you are my bestie. It would probably it's possibly a toss up between Ray from The Theft of Sunlight and Hitomi from my indie series Essential. Ray is just, she's this like really dour, very pragmatic person. Like she's super practical. She'll push everything off to the side and just focus on what needs to be done. And I do see part of myself in that, but I also just love it about her. She's hilarious because she won't even see what she doesn't allow herself to see because she's focused on the things she's doing. And then Hitomi is so unlike me. She's just a fighter. Like she's so scrappy and she's so optimistic. Like the girl, like you knock her down and she just gets right back up and keeps going. And you're like, it's okay to stay down 5 minutes.
You can stay there. It's okay.
I would take like a couple weeks on the floor. You know, not to say that she doesn't have bad things happen to her, because I'm the author. But also, and she doesn't get hurt and she doesn't have recovery periods, but it's that attitude of like just being like, just keeping going and being positive about it. Like she's gonna find a way out. I'm like, you know what? I just locked you in a room with a guy who is like gonna kill you. Why do you think that you can think your way out of the situation? Like you're chained to the wall. But she was just like, all right, I just have to figure this out. I'm like, that is not me.
It's the end of the line, girl.
How about you, Emily?
Yeah. No, like I said, I think I'm similar to May, but there's enough differences there that I think it's not a perfect fit. So.
But what about like your bestie character?
My bestie, I mean, I am so partial to May. I love her so much. I love Rue a lot, and it was really fun writing him as a dad in Sunshield and Floodpath. I feel like I reached like, he's like, embarrassing his children. It's like peak dad, energy.
Peak dad.
But I also loved writing May and Mona as mothers as well, and we get that at the end of Floodpath, and that actually was one of the very first scenes I ever wrote for either of the two books, and that that little like compass needle was what drove the entire duology towards that final point. So
that is really cool.
yeah, but I love Lark. She's great. Viren's an idiot. I love him. They're all, I don't know, they're great. All right, next question.
I'm sorry. I like it when somebody's like, my character's an idiot, but I still love him.
Yes.
It's like my cat.
Yeah.
I love my sweet, sweet cat.
But
that boy is not bright. He tried to eat aluminum foil yesterday. It was great.
Good.
So, yeah, I mean, he was very excited. It was shiny. Now we've got an Eli asking, what are y'all's biggest non-media inspirations? And they're looking for, I imagine, outside of what we consume on a daily basis. What do you look to?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say, Emily, you got nature going down.
Yeah. For me, it's definitely the natural world. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, for me, it's definitely the natural world. I can't be in a place and not be inspired by it. And so I have so many other manuscripts in the works that are all pulled from, I have this like fantasy Yellowstone with geysers and stuff and magic. And yeah, so those are really, that's really what drives me and what drives my stories. Woodwalker, my first book, was born on a hike. We were out hiking and I was like, but what if there were also swords?
I mean, there is really, like, anytime you ask that question,
it just makes everything better, really. How about you?
Outside inspiration that is I don't know. I mean, I think so I have traveled extensively, as we touched on in my bio. And so I think partly just life experiences, seeing different places, different cultures, different peoples, and it all being normal, right? Like they weren't different. They were just awesome. I went to a middle school that was overseas. It was an American curriculum school. It had people of 70 different nationalities.
Wow.
So,
cool.
I mean, there was no majority. We were all from everywhere, and that was normal. And so it's not quite answering the question.
No, I can totally see that.
But diversity and the diversity of culture and experience and background is really it's very real and very true and very deep for me. And so a lot of times what I'm doing in my books is trying to hammer down into those different truths and realities. And Emily, you write diverse stories. You have people with disabilities, and same as me. And that's some of the things that I love about our stories is that they reflect the real world in the intersectionality of our experiences and our realities. And then you're also with these characters who are just deeply human. So I'm sorry, that completely did not answer the question.
No, I think it did.
It did, because your answer was humans. Humans inspire you.
Humanity inspires me. If there were no humans, I would have no story.
Yeah, and that would be kind of sad. So that's what it is. It's human beings.
Yes.
And last but not least, and I apologize, person who asked this question, I can't find your name, but I will ask your question. What are you both currently working on? And is there any exciting projects that you want to share with everybody?
Do you want to go first, Emily? I see you doing a little dance.
I don't know. I've been going first a lot. Do you have something you're working on that you're excited about?
Well, I'm working on the second book. So Theft of Sunlight is a duology.
Good.
It's supposed to be one book, and then I got to like the 140,000 word mark. I'm about halfway through.
Oh, wow.
Maybe it's not one book. So I suppose I should also apologize in advance to anyone who's not read this book. It has a cliffhanger ending. And Emily is very upset with me. I actually hate cliffhangers. I have rage quit. I don't know how many series of cliffhangers. So it was an exercise in being
Intisar's revenge.
shy to have to write one myself. And I tried really hard to like wrap up some big questions. So it wasn't
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm working on solving the cliffhanger problem.
I don't mind cliffhangers. Surprisingly, they're not. I know some people hate them, but I didn't mind. I think I was more just like emotionally like, how could you, Intisar? Like, why?
Look, it's not my fault. We've established it's the story's fault.
Yeah. So I have a couple different works in progress that I was making pretty good progress on until COVID hit, and like all of a sudden, for some reason, I had a really hard time focusing on some of these things. And well, I guess the one book that is under contract right now and is slated to come out, come rain or shine, hopefully, is a middle grade book called The Field Guide to Mermaids. And it's basically like a natural guide to underwater habitats, but with mermaids. And so it's looking at all these different aquatic environments across the country, saltwater habitats, freshwater, brackish water like marshes, and then extreme habitats too. So, I've spent time in Yellowstone. So of course you've got hot spring mermaids, and you've got Salt Lake mermaids and cave mermaids and all this kind of stuff. And so it's all drawn from, my goal is like sneaky science. Like kids will flip through it looking at pictures of mermaids, but they're learning like, oh yeah, that's really cool that, there are organisms that live at deep sea vents or whatever, so that's been really fun. And I've been working on the illustrations for that. And just the way COVID has upended the publishing world this year, it's been a mess, but it's been a really, really fun project. And actually it's been really good for a while there, when my mental health was really taking a dive. I was like, all I have to do today is draw a mermaid. Like, I think I can probably do that. It's an achievable goal today. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And then I'm also working on a manuscript that started off as just like a brain candy manuscript of completely different than anything I've written before. Everything else that I've written is fantasy, but this was park ranger going from her job in Great Smoky Mountains to her new job in Olympic National Park in a vehicle that is very similar / identical to my parents' 89 Volkswagen van, traveling across the country and all the hijinks she gets into along the way. So that has been really, really fun.
So you know what, maybe it's something about the pandemic, because I 100% wrote a book I was not supposed to write this fall.
Yeah. Those are the best kind.
It's not a full length. It's not a full length book, and but it was that brain candy. I needed something that didn't have deadlines attached, and so I mentioned that I love the enemies to lovers trope. So it's supposed to be that. It turns out I'm way too far over here on the respect spectrum. So it's like enemies to allies who rock. And maybe something will happen down the road, but we need a little time to figure this out.
Yeah.
But it's actually, I ended up deciding that I would share it with my newsletter, chapter by chapter. So I'm going to start that.
Oh, fun.
And then we'll decide what to do with it, because it's not a full length book. So
yeah.
I'm not sure what we're gonna do with it, but it was a lot of I
It's
needed
awesome.
that break.
Sign up for Intisar's newsletter.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll put the link in the chat.
Yay!
Thank you all.
Alrighty. Well, everybody send them lots of love, please. And a big, big congratulations to you both again on your book launch, not book launch. I don't know what I'm saying anymore. But thank you so much for making Malaprops a part of this. We really appreciate it. And thank you everybody who attended this evening. And yeah, we really appreciate it. Yeah, you guys have a huge impact on us. And as a little indie store, even a book sale makes a difference to us. So thank you. We really truly appreciate it. So, and yeah, have a wonderful night. And we look forward to seeing, oh, I forgot to say this. Your link is still active. So if you want to rewatch a part of the conversation later, you can do so. We sent it out in the event invite. So feel free if there's a part of the YouTube chat that you wanted to catch up on. So again, thank you both so much. And I'll let them both say goodbye now.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Malaprops. Thanks, Intisar. This was so much fun. It was so great that our books just happened to be releasing on the same day. I'm so glad it worked out that way. So bye, Intisar's books. Yay!
Bye, Emily's books.
Yay!
Bye, both their books.
Everybody's books.
Just
Malaprops.
Thank
you so much.